Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Andrew Crapuchette, who is the founder and CEO of Red Balloon. Andrew, nice to see you.
Thanks for having me, and nice to see you as well.
So I'm intrigued by, let's just start with a bit of the background of this job site in terms of what inspired you to start it in the first place.
Yeah, that's hopefully helpful background for everyone. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I moved to Idaho 20 years ago, really for an opportunity to find a cost of living and a quality of life for my family that I thought was a good fit for who I was. Been lucky enough to start a number of businesses, do a number of exits. I've actually had 6 successful exits throughout the years, everything from private equity to management buyout. Really trying to build wealth and build a culture where people can create jobs, where people can build value for their customers. And so the last company that I was running was the nation's leading labor market data company.
Mm-hmm.
And I know labor market data sounds really boring because economics is the dismal science. But the reality is that if you have good data at your fingertips when you're making a decision about your career, about your education, about where you're going to move your family, then you're hopefully going to make a better decision about your career that has a huge impact on the lives of the people who are using that data.
Yeah.
So labor market data was an avenue to help universities, big corporations, local governments make better decisions and make people's lives better. So I enjoyed that journey. As we continued to sell the company, we sold it 4 different times. I had less and less ownership. And then the last owner basically said, look, you are a unapologetic conservative Christian, and that's just not a good fit for where we're going with this organization. And so it was, I wouldn't say totally amicable, but I tried to make it as amicable as possible.
So you were
Because there are bigger
fired,
things.
basically. Is that fair to say?
It technically I was not fired. I was moved to a board advisor position, which is what they do with CEOs.
Okay.
And then but yes, I was replaced by another CEO of the company.
And so when you saw this market for Red Balloon, which I believe was started 2 years ago, is that right? When did you start the site?
Yeah, this was started a little over a year ago.
Okay.
And this is part of the story is basically when I left that company, I'd been leading it for 20 years. And so it was kind of a little bit painful to leave a company that you'd built a culture, you'd built a very successful organization, making a lot of money for the shareholders, and then being removed for perception rather than performance. That stings a little bit. And so I was going to take a year off and do real estate. I'm doing a housing development. I own a number of buildings like the one that we're in right now. But a friend said, hey, it would be awesome if you just created a job board with a thesis around freedom, because it's hard to find freedom in the workforce anymore. And if you just create that, then it would be really fun for people. And I'm like, sure. And as a technologist, I literally created a job board over a weekend as a whim. And then within weeks, I got a call from Fox and Friends saying, hey, I heard you have the leading job board for those who don't have vaccine mandates within their workplace. And I'm like, well, yes, I've been around for 3 weeks. So yes, I am the leading job board in that category. And look, if people want to get a vaccine, that's entirely their decision. But I've always thought that you should treat people like adults. You should treat your employees like adults. And they should have a conversation with their doctor, not their HR department, about what they put in their body. And so we said, look, if you're going to be an employer on Red Balloon, you're not going to mandate this. You're going to let people make their own decisions and act as autonomous beings who actually have their own decision-making capabilities. And so that was the focus early on. And all of a sudden, I'm on Fox and Friends, and we start having hundreds of companies. Now we have thousands of companies, hundreds of thousands of job seekers. And all of a sudden, well, we have a business accidentally. I wasn't planning on it, but here we are.
Well, one of the things that's interesting when I was seeing some of the videos on the site, and you mentioned the vaccine mandates and Fox and Friends, has it really become, when we talk about freedom and values, it sounds to me like it really is much more on the conservative end of the spectrum. Would that be fair to say, Andrew, including, yourself? Obviously, you mentioned being a conservative Christian. Is that the market that you really see as the sweet spot for Red Balloon?
It is the sweet spot today, but I think anyone who wants freedom, anyone who wants to be able to live their values out loud in the workplace, and not live their values out loud in the workplace in a way that's detrimental to the performance of the business, but in a way where they're not being policed and monitored and nannied by the HR department, that's what our market is. And so we have people who I would probably disagree with ideologically significantly, who are using Red Balloon and getting the type of candidates who just want to show up and do a hard day's labor and then go home and be with their family or be with their community. And they don't want to spend all their time trying to virtue signal the latest fad that the HR department is pushing on them. So I would say the vast majority of the companies and the job seekers are on the conservative side, but the unifying factor of all of them is they want the freedom to be themselves, to work hard, and to not have to try and keep the latest zeitgeist happy with whatever trend is happening on Twitter. With people that don't necessarily know their business, don't know who those people are. They want to be free.
One of the interesting challenges, we've seen it this week with, I shouldn't say this week, let me redo that because who knows when this will be out, but the COVID mandates have pretty much faded. And to some extent, what's a challenge for employers is you've got your own private beliefs and then you've got what essentially is law. Let's take, for example, trans, what's happening with LGBTQ plus. It seems like that ability to, live out your personal values and the need to have corporate values that are more inclusive, that's a real divide in many, many parts of the country. How do you deal with that? Because I noticed that is one of the themes that ran through the video that I saw for Red Balloon.
Well, the issue is we don't want people to be discriminated by anything other than the value that they can bring to the organization, right? And I will go so far as to say many of the DEI policies that are in corporate America today are actually racist, because they're discriminating against people based on their sexual orientation, based on their skin color, based on who their parents are, what their background is, not based on what's the value that they can bring to the organization. Anytime you have a quota, a hiring quota, which many corporations, especially large corporations, do, hiring quota for certain ethnicities or sexual orientations or any of those things, anytime you have a quota that you're trying to bring, you are by nature discriminating based on something other than the merit that those people can bring and the value that those people can bring to the organization. And that's where Red Balloon, we really are the mainstream in a lot of ways, because most Americans would love to just be valued. They'd love to be able to work and have people care more about what they can do at work and the value they're bringing to the corporation than what they say on social media or what their skin color is, or any of those things. They want to be valued based on their work.
This is one of the reasons I really appreciate having the chance to speak with you, because when we talk about quotas, I haven't seen any companies that have actual quotas. I've certainly seen efforts to diversify and recruit. What are there actually examples out there where people may feel discriminated against? Scott Adams comes to mind, with Dilbert, and he says he didn't get certain jobs because he was white. Are there actual examples where you think there's discrimination against what in essence is the mainstream population right now in corporate America?
Well, I'd say corporate America, absolutely. So again, I ran a labor market data company. I was working with the people analytics departments at a lot of these organizations, and they had quotas of whether it was gender, whether it was sexual orientation, whether it was ethnicity and skin color. They had quotas for all these things where they said, look, we need to be 50% female, 50% male. And if we're not, we're discriminating. Well, the problem is whenever you set up a quota like that, what if you have you're already at 50% female and you have an amazing female come along, but sorry, we have a quota. It's more important for us to hit that than to hire the best person for the job.
Would there be specific companies that come to mind, Andrew? Because I'm genuinely curious, what companies have you found that have actual quotas?
I don't know that I know it. I can easily get you a whole series of those. I don't know any off the top. Well, I'm trying to think. I want to make sure I don't misquote. But
Okay.
I know that I worked with companies to help them build quotas. In fact, we built demographic data so that they understood what their quotas could be. Because if you're in Minnesota or if you're in Atlanta, you're going to have very different possibilities of gender quotas that you're able to accomplish. But also you look at our universities today where they say, look, there's too many smart Asians at our universities and we need to have a more diverse student body. Well, that's discrimination. It's saying that, we've got too many of this, we need to have more of something else. That's not saying we're valuing people on what they can bring. It's saying we're valuing people based on their skin color, who their parents are. And that is racist at the end of the day.
I think I don't want to drill down too much, and I think we can probably maybe agree to disagree on this with regard to efforts to have your companies reflect the diversity of the societies and the customer base in which you operate. One thing that really intrigues me is this polarization we've seen, and I think it's certainly something that many companies operate in red states and blue states, in small towns and large cities. What is it that's going to, in your mind, bring us together? Because this whole concept of the parallel economy, I don't see it. I think perhaps you do. Do you see a parallel economy developing? Where is it?
Yeah. So, for instance, I talked to a small construction company in the middle of Texas this morning, and he put his company values when he was describing his organization. So he described his small construction company as a God-fearing business that wants to bless their customers, right? So God-fearing business wants to bless their customers. He posts his job on Indeed, and Indeed says, this description of your organization violates our community standards. Therefore, we will not take your job postings anymore. Now, if he had described himself as a homosexual friendly business, that would have been fine. If he described himself in any number of other ways, that would have been no problem at all. But because he described himself as God-fearing and wants to bless his customers, he was told he's not allowed to participate in with Indeed with their job postings. And so all of a sudden he is now being segregated from the mainstream economy. So what's he going to do if he's going to go out and look to hire people who are just going to get the job done? Well, of course, he's going to come over to a redballoon.work and find, again, this kind of alternative economy. And look, my hope is that a redballoon.work wouldn't even be necessary if all of the job boards focused on what made America great in the first place. Then I wouldn't actually be necessary, and I'll go get back to my housing development. But the reality is that a lot of these employers and employees feel segregated against. I talked to a web development company this morning. They're down in Houston, Texas. And he says a lot of the candidates coming through Red Balloon are head and shoulders above what he's getting from an Indeed or a ZipRecruiter. He says, but what's interesting is that many of them have a little PTSD about being discriminated against in the workplace. And so they ask him a lot of questions about, are you going to treat me fairly? Are you going to give me freedom? Or are you going to discriminate against me in the future?
What's the demographics of your customer base? Let's talk about the demographics of the job applicants. In terms of the racial mix, do you have many people of color that are using the site?
I have no idea because I asked them what their skills are, not what their racial background is.
So you don't track for that. What about the companies that are using the site? Are there any big names that have come to redballoon.work that you'd want to mention?
Yeah. There are visible companies. So if you look at Strive Financial, which is Vivek Ramaswamy's company, you'll find his job postings on there. If you look at Louder with Crowder or Moms for America, Gavin DeBecker and Associate, which is one of the largest, most prestigious private security companies, you're not going to find a lot of publicly traded businesses. Part of that is we're a niche job board that is literally a little over a year old. And so you're generally not going to start with Fortune 500 companies. You're going to start with businesses that are small and looking for the right type of talent. But when I hear employers tell me that every hire that I get through redballoon.work is cleansing to our culture, not because they are based on skin color or ethnicity or any of those things, but based on the fact that they just show up and they work hard. And that is what employers today are looking for.
How do you align by values if you're not checking for any sort of demographic data, what do you check for to make sure that the person you're putting up who wants to go to do they say, I want to go to a God-fearing company, or how do they self-identify values?
So we actually have the job seeker sign a pledge that they are just going to be a hardworking individual, and are going to focus on the value that they can bring to the company and not bring identity politics into any of it. Right. And so that's literally the filtering mechanism. And so and then what we'll do for a lot of our employers, excuse me.
You can start again. Go ahead. What you do for a lot of your employers is what?
Yeah, I'll start.
That's fine.
So the filtering mechanism today is simply that people, job seekers, sign a pledge that they will focus on the value that they can bring to their employer. They're going to show up, they're going to work hard, and they're not going to fall into identity politics. That's as simple as that. And again, these employers are like, the people that are showing up are head and shoulders better because they just have a work ethic that differentiates them from what we're going to get from the mainstream job sites.
Which you could have.
Yeah, go ahead.
If let's say if you're LGBTQ plus, you have an equal work ethic. One of the challenges right now is, how do we create a workspace that feels like it's open for everybody? And so if I am somebody who, for example, does identify as trans, is there a space for me in a lot of the companies that are coming to you?
If you want to focus on the value you can bring to the company and not your personal beliefs, then I think you actually are going to do very well in any of the red balloon companies, right? If you say, I am Black first and I'm a software developer second, I think you should start with, I'm a software developer who's going to bring great value to organization, regardless of my skin color, regardless of my background, regardless of decisions that I want to make on my off time, right? If someone is vaccinated or not vaccinated, the point is, can they do the job? And that's what we want to get back to in America, is not focusing on the identity politics of who you are, what do you do in your personal life? That's fantastic. Can you do the job? And that's where we want America to be. And that's where the red balloon employers are looking for, people who are just focused on working hard.
And now I've noticed you have a study out, and one of the studies this week was by, I believe it's Rasmussen, was the one that caught the attention of Scott Adams, the Dilbert creator. That was a 2-question poll. One question being, is it okay to be white? The second question, can blacks be racist? That felt to me very intentionally provocative, baiting people. What's your view as somebody who's been in this realm and had a company that sold multiple times of that kind of poll?
Yeah. I am not a pollster. I was a data analyst, someone who, we produced billions of data points on the U.S. economy every single month. And so that feels like a baiting poll. But I'll be honest, I'm not a pollster. I'm not someone who's an expert in that area. But it did not seem like a productive poll. And so I wouldn't want to respond to it personally.
Well, but this some of the perception questions, I think you do have a good handle on, because you speak to employers all the time. And one perception, of course, that's come out is that the media is racist. Elon Musk said it in response to what happened with the Dilbert comic strip. What do you think yourself, as somebody who is on the front lines, consuming media, talking to employers, etc.?
I think that there's a lot of good information that you can find in the media, and I'll be honest, I've never been a media junkie or someone who read a lot of what was going on in the news, because it just I wanted to focus on the value I could bring to my community, to my company. I do a lot of nonprofit work. That was more interesting to me. Obviously, in the red balloon world, I need to know what's going on in the world, and so I'm reading more of it. And you just have to be careful, because everyone brings their biases into this. There's a lot of accusations that employers have these, that they have biases that they are bringing to every hiring decision, to every customer decision. And it's no different whether you're on the right or the left. Of course, you have a worldview. And I would say that is probably the case in the media as well. So again, I think a lot of employers that I'm talking to on Red Balloon, they're tired of the mainstream media. They believe the mainstream media is pushing a worldview, is actively trying to send a message about where the society is and where it should go, that a lot of them just don't trust anymore. And their response is, you know what, I'm just going to get back to the work that I do, the value that I bring to my customers, and I'm just not going to pay attention to the media. And we see that with, a lot of the layoffs that have happened in the mainstream media, because people just aren't paying attention as more.
Or and technological change as well. Let me ask you a bit more about sort of the political scene, because I think that's also interesting. We're at a period right now we're seeing a lot of people step forward as GOP candidates. I know President Trump is certainly put his hat into the ring to be president again. I'm not sure from where you sit, what is the landscape looking like politically right now? There was this sense of a lot of anger. Do you think that anger is still there? Is it dissipating? How optimistic are you about the future of this country? Because I think it's, I feel like we don't get much opportunity to really engage with people on the right and on the left, and any chance to get outside of a bubble and connect. What are you seeing?
Absolutely. Well, and the reality is, like, I've seen polls ranging from 20 to 30% of people in states like Arizona and Georgia don't believe their votes are being counted. And this is where I want to be very careful of polls, because polls can be very misleading. The questions are going to almost self-determine the answer. And so I don't know what the value of those are. I can tell you, of the hundreds of conversations that I have on a monthly basis with job seekers and employers all across this country, people are very concerned about voter integrity. People are very concerned that we have a fractured nation, that we are on a crash course for a great divorce, and that they don't trust other Americans, right? When I have stories of a lady from Deloitte who called me up and said, hey, I was just in a DEI training at my job, and the trainer ends the training by saying, I wish all those unvaccinated Americans would go to an island and die together. Like,
well, that's outrageous. I mean, that's outrageous. Why is DEI? Outrageous. Why is that the punching bag? Because really, at the end of the day, the word "I" stands for inclusion, which is including people of faith, including white, correct, black. Why is that become such an evil term?
Yeah. Honestly, DEI had the best of intentions going into it, and I like the idea. Like, diversity is an end unto a means. Because diversity is not an end unto itself, but it is an end unto a more creative company, a more innovative company. You don't just want a bunch of cookie cutter people, because they're not going to come up with great solutions. And so I think it started with the best of intentions, but unfortunately it's been weaponized by a lot of people on the left to use as a bludgeoning tool to say that you're a racist. I talked to a gentleman recently. He says, I'm quitting my job because I'm told on a weekly basis that I'm a racist, and there's nothing I can do about it. And he says, and every employee is told that. And think about the morale hit if every day you're told you're doing something wrong and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's really hard to get up and go to work and say, I'm excited about doing this. And he says, and this is told to all the employees, white, black, Asian, like, etc. This is the talking point that unfortunately the HR department has decided is important for the company, and it's destroying morale. And if you look at the productivity numbers of the U.S. economy today, American workers are far less productive than they were 2 years ago before the pandemic. And the American Management Association actually estimated in 2019, so before the pandemic, that $100 billion a year is lost in America due to office politics. And
most of us are working in our bedrooms now, too. Isn't that part of the problem? The remote work, the mental health strain of not being together in an office?
Absolutely. But again, if in 2019, $100 billion was lost due to lack of productivity from office politics, that number has only gone up from the remote work, because when you don't have an opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation with someone, it's easy to think things about them that aren't true, right? And so I'm worried that we are in a very fractured society, and a lot of the employers and employees, job seekers on redballoon.work, they're worried about this as well. Many of them would love to just get back to the world where we can focus on work. And that's why Red Balloon, in one sense, really is more mainstream than in a parallel economy. We represent the vast majority of Americans who would love to be able to have a conversation about politics over a beer after work, but be able to focus on our job while we're at the office.
Yeah, it's true. We've been so vilified. One other question, because I mentioned in an article I wrote recently, Bill Marriott, who to me has always represented a man of great faith like yourself, but somebody who really put what he called American values ahead of his personal moral values as a Christian, which was very much, inclusion. He was out in front with same-sex health benefits. As a conservative employer yourself, how do you manage and try to create an environment that feels inclusive for you?
Yeah, I guess I'll be honest. I care less about having everyone feel inclusive and having everyone feel like they're valued based on what they're doing. And so if you focus on work, if you focus on the value that your employees are bringing to the organization, your organization will do well, and people's souls will actually be revived and energized, because we all love to work hard. It's good for us. And when you're valued not based on anything that you can control, but based on your skin color or some other outside factor, that's demoralizing. And so the way that you make people feel included is you give them hard jobs, you hold them responsible for it, and then you praise them when they do a good job, regardless of what their decisions are outside the work environment. If you can get to that, that's what made America great in the first place, and that's what Red Balloon stands for.
Do you want to give any thoughts as to the political environment? Is there any candidate out there that really sort of represents the right direction for where this country's going right now? When you look forward to...
That is a tricky one. That's probably outside my purview. And so I think that anyone who wants to get back to what made America great in the first place, which was people working hard, being held accountable, and getting their job done, is great. But I want to be careful. Red Balloon is about great work in the workplace. And so I'm mostly staying out of politics.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.